This was a very specific assignment. Take this one of the 7 cantatas, each of which is addressed to one of the limbs of Jesus on the cross, and compose a piece of music between 10 and 15 minutes that gives us a 21st century response to the overall theme of how we observe the suffering of others. The project started with my thoughts about the differences between cultures and ages and geographies and how we do that very thing. It was fascinating to me to see that late 17th century Baroque oratorio, of course, is directed to Christ, as most of the art of the time would have been, and what would happen if we asked people to address that issue today. It's very interesting to me that the response was so unanimously, sure, this sounds crazy, but I think I'll do that.
When I started the work, for me the greatest discovery was how great the Buxtehude is.
I hadn't known this set of cantatas, or heard of them, but there was something so compelling about the music. The simplicity of it and the specificity of the sentiments involved. I loved the idea from the very beginning of the whole proposition of making a contemporary response to this rather old music.
The project wasn't like write a piece about suffering, it was write a piece about observing suffering. And talking about suffering is one of those topics you can't really talk about. You feel from every one of them a time spent thinking and then time spent writing. It's very clear to me when I'm conducting.
Bearing in mind this whole idea of suffering morphed into the earth as breast, the center of our being, in the way that the breast, as Buxtehude uses it here. And we decided that the earth is suffering in many ways. It's culturally suffering, but it's also environmentally suffering.
And I got assigned the niece, and that was something that when I initially saw it, I thought, wow, what do I do with that? It's so loaded. The knees, they represent so much. They represent, forgiveness. You go down to your knees, and love. You go down to your knees if you're proposing, and a lot of things that really relate to suffering. So my theme very much became about human suffering today, and it was very emotional. I just have to say, and also because of the times we live in right now. So that became a very strong theme in the music. It's difficult to take a reference, for me at least, a reference from the music. So it was more about the theme of the whole project that really touched me very deeply.
I always like taking something older and reimagining it. So in a way, sort of working for Buxtehude to fit very well with what I like to do with music. But the real challenge for me, though, was to deal with the subject matter, which is the limbs of Christ and human suffering.
The initial attraction for me was that it was so different from what I had been doing. I'd never really written a piece that could be considered sacred. I had once written a piece about religion, however, was not a sacred piece. I rejected a lot of things that I had grown up with. And so this is sort of one of the last things, is bringing back my upbringing in the Catholic Church and my engagement in a pretty religious family. I don't think I would have picked the feat, but I was really excited to have been assigned the feat because it allowed me to think a lot about foundations and allowed me to think a lot about the actual logistics of crucifixion, partially thinking about sacrifice and this figure giving of himself physically and spiritually, and then also the sort of potential bitterness of that when then you see, despite that, what we sort of become as a people and as a civilization and as a planet. I can imagine there being some bitterness there from the perspective of that Christ figure.
The contact for me as a musician, as a composer, to suffering is nature suffering, because music is sound, which is moved air, through nature, through board of instruments, through brass and so on. And so I started there for me to really feel where do I as a musician experience directly suffering as distorted, rationalized, forced into grid sounds. Writing for choir is something extremely fulfilling and fascinating. It's such a primal instrument. And so I thought the voices of the choir are almost like a mediator between me as a composer, as a human being, and music, nature. And choirs are beyond new music or classical music or early music, I find, because in opposite to the music ensembles, so they're such a timeless instrument.
What I wanted to do was take people that either I really knew how to write for choir, or I knew would put the time in to get there. I made the decisions based on what I thought they would bring the musical language to that particular text. Each of them has its own thing. Caroline and Anna decided to write only for the strings, and David's piece has great drums off a car and electric guitar, synthesizer. Lou's piece uses sort of standard chamber symphony that we work in. Sancho's piece has a bunch of cowbells in it that kind of ring distantly, and Hans's piece uses a whole bunch of multiphonics, which is playing, in this case, a reed instrument in a very particular way, which creates these harmonics way above it. You can hardly hear them at times. And then there's these little tiny sharp areas where the full choir kind of shimmers just above.
For me, when I got the text from the writer, that's where I started to get a clear sense of a melody for the piece. That would be kind of, and I knew it would have to be a solo melody, and that's where the ideas for the external material for the strings and the choir were born, because I wanted the solo voice to be alienated in a sense. I wanted her to be alone and feel vulnerable a little bit against the external elements in the music. And initially I was going to use a bigger ensemble, I was going to use a chamber orchestra, but the piece kind of demanded that it would be concentrated to strings and the textures of the strings.
The crossing choir is quite large, so I was thinking in the beginning about how to balance it with the instrumental ensemble. And sometimes also the voices are getting very instrumental, and sometimes they are singing just melodies, and sometimes they are whistling and whispering, and it's nothing new, but this time it's the first time I had it together, choir with instrumental ensemble. It was so many possibilities.
The crossing is organization, a group of people, and it's unique in its sound, it's unique in its heart, in its sensitivity to whatever it has to do.
My role is largely to allow everybody to do technically difficult things in an environment of emotional clarity, so that they feel that they can also take risk in an emotional way at the same time while being technical.